The monitor screamed before the man did. Heart rate spiking, oxygen dropping, and in the middle of the chaos, a decorated Marine commander sat upright in his hospital bed, jabbed his finger toward the young trauma nurse rushing to save his life, and shouted 3 words that stopped the entire room cold: "Get someone else." If you believe broken people deserve a second chance, and that the deepest wounds are sometimes healed by the people we least expect, hit that like button, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Midnight Tales, because stories like this one are just getting started. His name was Colonel Daniel Marsh, and 3 days ago he had walked into Ridgeview Memorial Hospital under his own power, jaw clenched, refusing a wheelchair even as his blood pressure told a different story. A car accident on the interstate had crushed his ribs and punctured a lung, and the surgeons had patched him up, but something inside him refused to be patched. He had spent 22 years in the Marine Corps, had buried more friends than he could count, and had come home to a country that seemed to have moved on without him. He did not trust doctors. He did not trust hospitals. And on that particular morning, standing at the foot of his bed with a chart in her hands, he especially did not trust the young nurse named Sarah Bishop. Sarah was 29 years old, 5 years into a nursing career that had already cost her more than most people ever have to give. She had chosen trauma care because she believed the worst moments of a person's life were exactly when they needed someone who wouldn't flinch. But nothing had prepared her for a man like Colonel Marsh, whose eyes carried a kind of exhaustion that had nothing to do with his injuries. When she reached for his foreline to adjust his medication, he recoiled as if she had struck him, and the words tore out of him before he could stop them. "Get someone else." He said it loud enough for the entire wing to hear, loud enough that a doctor and 2 other nurses came rushing in, loud enough that for a moment, Sarah simply stood there, hands still raised, wondering what she had done wrong. She hadn't done anything wrong. That was the terrible, invisible truth of it. Colonel Marsh wasn't rejecting her competence. He was rejecting something buried so deep inside himself that he could barely name it. 2 years earlier, in a hospital very much like this one, on the other side of the world, he had held the hand of a young corporal from his unit as the boy bled out on a gurney, promising him he would make it home. The corporal did not make it home. And every white coat, every hospital smell, every stranger in scrubs reaching toward him with gentle hands had become, in his mind, a reminder of a promise he could not keep. He didn't want kindness. Kindness felt like something he no longer deserved. Sarah lowered her hand and stepped back, and for a moment the room held its breath, waiting to see what she would do. She could have walked away. She could have let another nurse take over his care, filed the incident, and gone on with her shift as if nothing had happened. Anyone would have understood. But something in the way Colonel Marsh's hands trembled, something in the way his anger seemed to be covering an ocean of grief he had never let anyone see, made her stay. Instead of arguing, instead of defending herself, she simply began rolling up the sleeve of her scrub top, slowly, deliberately, until the tattoo on her upper arm came into full view. It was not a delicate design. It was a Marine Corps emblem, an eagle, globe, and anchor, inked into her skin above a small banner that read a unit designation Colonel Marsh recognized instantly, because it was not just any unit. It was his unit. The room went silent in a different way now, the kind of silence that comes not from fear but from disbelief. Colonel Marsh stared at her arm as though he were staring at a ghost, his mouth slightly open, his anger draining out of his face and leaving something far more fragile behind. He asked her, voice barely above a whisper, how she had that tattoo, who gave her the right to wear it. Sarah's answer came quietly, without pride, without performance. Her older brother had served in that same unit, had trained alongside men who would later serve under Colonel Marsh's command, and had come home from his second deployment forever changed, carrying wounds no scan could ever find. He had struggled for years, fighting battles no one else could see, and on the night Sarah lost him, she had made herself a promise. She would spend her life on the other side of that struggle, not as a soldier, but as someone standing in the gap when soldiers came home broken, someone who would not let another family receive the silence her family had received. She got the tattoo the week after his funeral, not to claim his service as her own, but to carry a piece of him with her into every shift, every patient, every hospital room where a hardened man might one day sit in a bed, furious at the world, refusing to let anyone close. Colonel Marsh did not speak for a long moment. The machines around him kept their steady rhythm, but something in his chest had shifted, some wall that had stood for 2 years beginning, quietly, to crack. He asked her brother's name, and when she said it, he closed his eyes, because he remembered him. Not well, not personally, but he remembered the file, the transfer, the quiet young man who had struggled to reintegrate and whom the system had failed in ways the colonel had spent 2 years trying not to think about. He had lost so many men, in combat and after it, and he had told himself there was nothing more he could have done. Looking at Sarah now, at the tattoo she wore not as a costume but as a covenant, he understood for the first time that grief did not have to be carried alone in silence. It could be carried forward, transformed into something that reached toward the next person still fighting to survive. He reached out his hand, not to push her away this time, but to hold hers, and he told her he was sorry, not just for the words he had shouted, but for every wall he had built since the day he lost that young corporal. Sarah did not offer empty comfort. She simply stayed, sitting beside his bed for the rest of her shift, listening as a man who had commanded hundreds finally allowed himself to grieve out loud, to speak the corporal's name, to admit that he had been running from hospitals because he had been running from the memory of a promise broken. It was not a dramatic transformation, not a movie ending wrapped in a bow. It was slower than that, quieter than that, the way real healing almost always is. Over the following days, Colonel Marsh allowed his care team back into his room. He allowed himself to be helped. And each time Sarah checked on him, he would glance at her arm, at the emblem and the unit number, and something in him would soften just a little more. On the day he was discharged, Colonel Marsh did not simply thank her and walk away. He asked if he could shake her hand, and when she extended it, he held it in both of his and told her that her brother would have been proud of the woman she had become, and that somewhere, wherever good Marines end up, the corporal he had lost was proud of her too. Sarah cried after he left, not from sadness, but from the strange and holy relief of watching someone finally lay down a burden he had carried alone for far too long. She had not saved his life with a scalpel or a medication chart. She had saved it by refusing to leave when he told her to. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that the people who seem the hardest to reach are often the ones carrying the heaviest weight, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who might need these words today. Before we go, we have one small request. If you made it this far, comment the word "second chance" below, so we know this story reached you, and so others scrolling by can feel, even for a second, that they are not alone in whatever they are carrying. Colonel Marsh returned to Ridgeview Memorial 6 months later, not as a patient, but as a visitor, carrying a small velvet box. Inside it was a Marine Corps pin, one he had carried through 3 deployments, one that had never left his side. He placed it in Sarah's hand and told her that some family is chosen not by blood, but by the wounds we survive and the people brave enough to sit beside us while we heal, and that from that day forward, she would always have a place among the family of Marines who called him brother.